Hare Krishna. This is Madhavananda Das, your spiritual guide and well-wisher. We are having this special series on Kaveri VAIBHAVAM, the divine glories of river Kaveri. Before we begin today's session, I shall chant a few prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Prasida Kalyana Gunabhirame Kaveri Kaveri Mama Prasida. Prasida Kamadi Hare Pavitre Kaveri Kaveri Mama Prasida. Hare Krishna. So I would like to welcome all the viewers again for this special series on Kaveri VAIBHAVAM, where we have been hearing and discussing the wonderful spiritual glories of river Kaveri, which is mentioned in many Vedic literatures, even in the Rig Veda, Yajurveda, and in all the 18 Mahapuranas. The river Kaveri is glorified as one of the 7 most sacred rivers, which are enumerated as Gangecha, Yamune, Chaiva, Godavari, Saraswati, Narmada, Sindhu, Kaveri, Jalesmin, Sannidhim Kuru. So we have also heard the description of river Kaveri in the topmost Vedic scripture, which is Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as its description and mention in all the various Puranas. We also heard the wonderful background story of river Kaveri in her original form as Lopamudra, and how she was created by the great sage Agastya Maharshi. The wonderful and amazing history of Agastya and his marriage with Lopamudra is very beautifully narrated in the Mahabharata Vanaparva from chapter 96 to 99. Today we shall hear of the fascinating history of Kaveri as described in the Kaveri Purana or the Kaveri Mahatmya of the Skanda Purana in the Sahyadri Khanda. It is explained that long back, when the Devatas and the Danavas, the Asuras, made an agreement for the churning of the milk ocean, which is also known as the Samudra Manthana Leela. This is also very beautifully described in the 8th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and how the Supreme Lord Vishnu had a very wonderful role in this entire Leela, the pastime of the Samudra Manthana Leela. In just one Leela of the churning of the milk ocean, the Supreme Lord Vishnu manifested multiple avatars, multiple incarnations. There is the incarnation of Ajita Avatara, and then after that the Supreme Lord manifested in this Samudra Manthana Leela the Kurma Avatara as the gigantic tortoise incarnation. He also manifested the Sahasra Shesha, the 1,000-armed incarnation, in which he sat atop the Mandara mountain, which was the churning rod for this milk ocean, for the churning of the milk ocean. He also later came as Dhanvantari Avatara, carrying the Amrita Kalasha, and later he also appeared as Mohini Avatara, as the most enchanting and beautiful woman, and deluded the Asuras and delivered the Amrita Kalasha to the recipients, to the qualified recipients, which are the Devatas. Later, Mohini disappeared. She came to the Sahyadri Parvata, and she entered inside a cave. In the Kaveri Mahatmya, in the Kaveri Purana, it is mentioned that the Supreme Lord in his Mohini Avatara later came to the Sahyadri Parvata, which is the Western Ghats, to the place known as Brahmagiri, and he entered inside a cave. During the same period as when the Samudra Manthana, the churning of the milk ocean, took place, Lakshmi Devi, the eternal consort of Lord Vishnu, had also manifested Vishnu Maya in the form of Lopamudra or Kaveri. So even Kaveri came to the southern regions, and she was handed over to Lord Brahma, and therefore Kaveri became the daughter of Lord Brahma or Brahma Kanya. After some time, there was a great sage by name Kavera. Kavera Maharshi or Kavera Raja, King Kavera performed intense austerities in Sahyadri Parvata, and when Lord Brahma appeared to him, King Kavera asked for the ultimate boon of attaining moksha or liberation. Lord Brahma at that time contemplated and handed over Lopamudra to Kavera Raja, and granted him that you would attain liberation by the grace of Lopamudra. So because Lopamudra was adopted by Kavera, she is also known as Kavera Kanya and also as Kaveri. So Kaveri grew up in the Sahyadri Parvata under the protection and shelter of Kavera Maharaj, and once when Kaveri was performing intense austerities with the intention of becoming a river in order to deliver her father from material bondage, and also to deliver anyone who took shelter of this holy river. With this intention, Kaveri or Lopamudra came to the Sahyadri Parvata and engaged in intense tapasya austerities to propitiate the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, Lord Narayana. After some time, the Supreme Lord was pleased and manifested to Kaveri and asked her for any benediction. So Kaveri at that time prayed to the Supreme Lord to transform her into a most sacred and holy river, which would deliver her father Kavera as well as anyone who approached and took shelter of this holy river. The Supreme Lord was pleased to grant this benediction, but also informed Kaveri that she would have to wait for some time for the opportune moment when Lord Brahma would come to the same exact place and worship the Supreme Lord Vishnu, would worship him in the form of an amalaki tree or a gooseberry tree. It is also described in various Vedic scriptures that the Supreme Lord has a special residence in the amalaki vriksha. So later, when Lord Brahma would worship the Supreme Lord Vishnu in the Amalaki tree at that location, with the water of the Viraja river, the Viraja river is located as the boundary between the material world and the spiritual world of Vaikuntha Loka. So Lord Brahma would obtain this Viraja river, and from his Shankha would gather the waters of Viraja and worship the Supreme Lord Vishnu in the gooseberry tree, in the Amla tree, in the Sahyadri Kshetra. At that time, Kaveri should take the opportunity to merge in the waters which have washed the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu, and merge in those waters and become the sacred river and flow to deliver everyone who comes in contact with her. Being so benedicted by the Supreme Lord Vishnu, Kaveri continued to stay in the Sahyadri Parvata, and once it so happened that the great sage Agastya Maharshi chanced to see upon Lopamudra or Kaveri, and Agastya was enchanted, captivated by the divine, beautiful features of Kaveri and proposed to marry her. Kaveri agreed to the marriage proposal of Agastya Maharshi on the condition that if at any point of time Agastya Maharshi would leave Kaveri for a long duration of time, Kaveri would then leave the company of Agastya. Agastya agreed to this condition, and then Kaveri got married to Agastya Maharshi. There are many wonderful pastimes described of Kaveri or Lopamudra with Agastya Maharshi at Agastya Ashrama in the Sahyadri Parvata. One such beautiful pastime is that once when Agastya and Kaveri Lopamudra were traveling from one place to another, Agastya became very sick, and Kaveri lifted Agastya Maharshi. It is also described in the Vedic scriptures that Agastya is quite a well-built personality. Yet Kaveri, in a mood of service to her husband, carried the heavy frame of Agastya and was taking him back to their home. And it was during the night time, Kaveri, as she was carrying the body, as she was carrying Agastya Maharshi, by mistake the foot of Agastya touched a saintly person on the way. The saintly person became offended by being touched with the foot of some person, and therefore he immediately pronounced a curse that whosoever feet has touched me would die by the next sunrise. Kaveri became very anxious for protecting her husband, and by the power of her chastity, she pronounced that the sun would not rise the next morning, because the curse had been put on her husband that by the next sunrise he would die. So in order to protect her husband, Kaveri, by dint of her tapasya, by dint of her austerity and by her chastity, declared that the sun would not rise the next day. So true to her words, the sun was unable to rise the next morning. This caused great concern, and all the three worlds got agitated. Finally, the Devatas approached Kaveri and begged her, opportuned her, requested her to take back her words and allow the sun to rise for the benefit of the entire world. So Kaveri agreed on the condition that the curse of the saintly person upon Agastya Rishi should not act, and at that time the Devatas were pleased to nullify the curse of the saintly person, and in this way the chastity of Kaveri protected her husband Agastya Maharshi. So after some time, it so happened that when Kaveri was staying in Agastya Ashrama, Agastya Maharshi went with some of his disciples to take bath in the river Suvarnamukhi. And after taking his holy bath, some of his disciples asked some philosophical question, and Agastya began to explain the intricacies of the philosophical truths in order to clear the doubts of his disciples. A long time passed, and as Kaveri was waiting for her husband to come back, a very long time passed, and Agastya broke the promise that he had given to Kaveri, that he would not leave her for a long duration of time. So Kaveri also observed at that time that Lord Brahma had come to that place, and he had approached. Lord Brahma suddenly had realized the presence of the Supreme Lord Vishnu in a very special, in a very specific amalaki, in a gooseberry tree. The Supreme Lord Vishnu had manifested in a very divine, resplendent, transcendental form in that specific amalaki tree, and this was observed by Lord Brahma, who came rushing to worship the Supreme Lord in that amalaki, in that gooseberry tree. Lord Brahma collected the water of the Viraja river, which is beyond this material world, in his shankha, in his conch shell, and worshipped the Supreme Lord Vishnu with the waters of the Viraja from his shankha, with his conch shell. And as the waters washed the Supreme Lord and his lotus feet began to flow at that place, a divine voice was heard by Kaveri that inspired her that this is the most opportune, the best opportunity for Kaveri to merge in these divine, spiritual, transcendental waters that have washed the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord Vishnu, and merge her existence in these divine waters to become a most sacred river. Kaveri then took this opportunity and transformed herself in one amsha and in one of her form, and she merged in these divine waters, and thus flowed the river Kaveri. Some of the disciples who had been left by Agastya in the care of Kaveri became very anxious and immediately informed Agastya Maharshi, who came rushing and observed that Kaveri had transformed into a most sacred river. Agastya came to Kaveri and further guided her how to flow in the southern peninsula and proceed towards the Mahodadhi or the Bay of Bengal and merge into the sea. So Kaveri then began to flow, and the place, the location where Kaveri started her journey came to be known as Brahmagiri, the place where Lord Brahma worshipped the Supreme Lord Vishnu, and it also got the name of Sahya Amalaka Kshetra or Sahyamalaka Kshetra, the place in the Sahyadri mountain where the Supreme Lord Vishnu manifested as the Amalaki tree or the gooseberry tree. Kaveri also became glorified as Dakshina Ganga or the Ganga of the south, because just like Ganga is also known as Vishnupadi, having her origin in the divine lotus feet of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. Likewise, Kaveri has her origin in the divine waters that have washed the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. And this is the wonderful narration of the origin of river Kaveri as described in the Kaveri Purana or the Kaveri Mahatmya of the Skanda Purana. So as Kaveri flows, it is also mentioned in the Shiva Purana Vidyeshwara Samhita chapter 12, text number 17 to 19, that the great sacred river Kaveri flowing from the mountain Sahya is most sacred and holy and has 27 mouths. It accords all the cherished desires. The banks of river Kaveri are the bestowers of the Swargaloka, of the heavenly planets, and also the bestowers of the region of Brahmaloka as well as Vishnuloka, the eternal kingdom of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. Kaveri is also mentioned as Dakshina Ganga, that Aham Dakshina Gangeti Vishruta Veda Mudhani Imam Madhura Paniyam Dakshina Patha Jahnavi. In this verse of the Puranas, it is mentioned that Kaveri is known as Dakshina Ganga, or also as Dakshina Patha Jahnavi, the Ganga of the southern region. In the Agni Purana, it is stated that Kaveri Trijanmanaha, Kaveri Salila Pluta, Kaveri Vatadye Sprishta Yanti Hare Padam, that even if a person comes in contact with Kaveri Vata, the wind blowing from the waters of the Kaveri, Kaveri Vatadye Sprishtaha Yanti Hare Padam, even they are released from the cycle of repeated birth and death, and they can attain the divine abode of the Supreme Lord Hari, Lord Vishnu. So in this way, the river Kaveri is also glorified as Kanaka Sarit, or Kanaka means gold and Sarit means the river. The river Kaveri also is supposed to contain, as also confirmed by the great Acharya Vedanta Deshikar, that it contains an immense quantity of Kanaka or gold. Kaveri is also glorified by Agastya Maharshi, that in course of time the banks of river Kaveri would become the residence of many great personalities and many great sages. Agastya gave the benediction to river Kaveri that Aham tu Vaikhanasa Valakhilyer Anye Munindraihi Sanakadibhishcha Sarvatrate Punyatate Vasami. Agastya conferred the benediction on the river Kaveri that Sarvatrate Punyatate Vasami, I shall always live on the banks of your sacred waters, and along with Anyehi Munindraihi, along with many great saintly personalities, including Sanaka Adibhi, the four Kumaras, and many great personalities. Agastya also blessed Kaveri that Vibhutye Dakshinatyanam Kshemaya Vijayaya Cha Maya Chaivabhyanubhyata Gaccha Devi Yatha Sukham. He benedicted that Kaveri, that you can continue to flow in the southern peninsula of Bharatavarsha and bestow all material and spiritual benefit to the inhabitants of these places. In this way, the Vedic scriptures have the wonderful narration of the divine origin and the glories of river Kaveri. There is a very beautiful Dhyana Shloka, or the verse to meditate upon river Kaveri, which is described as Accha Swachcha Lasad Dukula Vasanam Padmasanadhyayinim Hastanyestavarabhyam cha Kalasham Rakindukoti Prabham Bhaswadbhushana Gandhamalya Ruchiram Charu Prasannananam Shri Gangadi Samastati Thanilayam Dhyayami Kaverikam. That we should Dhyayami, we should meditate upon Mother Kaveri as Acha Swachhala Saddukulavasanam, one who wears, Kaveri wears spotlessly clean silk garments, and Padmasana Dhyayinim, one who is seated in Padmasana. Hastanyasta Varabhya, she has one palm of her hand pointing down, indicating that she would grant the desires of everyone who seek her shelter, and another palm holding the lotus flower, Abja Kalasham Rakendu Koti Prabham, and another palm holding upwards, granting Abhaya or fearlessness. She also is resplendent, more effulgent than Raka Indu Koti Prabham, than crores of suns and moons combined together. The dazzling effulgence of Mother Kaveri surpasses even millions of suns and moons combined together. Bhaswat Bhushana Gandhamalya Ruchiram Charu Prasannananam. She wears very, very effulgent and shining jewels. Bhaswat Bhushana Gandhamalya Ruchiram. She wears very fragrant garlands and always has Charu Prasannananam, a very pleasing and smiling face. Shri Gangadi Samasta Tirtha Nilayam Dhyayami Kaverikam. All the various holy places of the entire universe, of the entire world, including Ganga, the most sacred river, Ganga Adi Samasta Tirtha Nilayam, reside. So Ganga and all the holy tirthas of this world reside in the holy waters of river Kaveri. It is also very important to note that the exact time, the exact day of the merging of Kaveri into the holy waters that had washed the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu, that is the exact birth time or the birthday, the origin of river Kaveri. That is mentioned in the scriptures to be the time of Tula Sankramana. Tula Masa is the 7th month of the Vedic solar calendar. The Vedic calendar has two kinds of calculation of the Samvatsara or the year. One is the Chandra or the lunar calendar, and the other is the Saura or the solar calendar. So, in the solar calendar or in the Sauramana calendar, there are again 12 months, and the 7th month is called the Tula Masa. And in the Surya Siddhanta, it is calculated that the duration of the Tula Masa is 29 days, 21 hours, 26 minutes and 24 seconds. And in the Agni Purana, it is stated that Shat Shashti Koti Tirthani Dvisapta Bhuvaneshu Cha Keshavasyagnaya Yanti Tulamase Marudvridham. Marudvridha is another name of river Kaveri, and during the time of Tulamasa, during this period of the 7th month, that is the Tulamasa, Shat Shashti Koti Tirthani, 60 crore of holy places which are situated in Dvisapta Bhuvaneshu Cha, in all the 14 planetary systems, the 7 upper planetary systems and in the 7 lower planetary systems. The Vedic cosmology explains that there are 14 planetary systems. The 7 upper planetary systems are Bhuloka, Bhuvagloka, Swargloka, Mahagloka, Janaloka, Tapoloka and Brahmaloka, and then there are the 7 Adholokas or the 7 lower planetary systems known as Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala and Patala. So there are many holy places To be exact, 60 crore Shashti Koti Tirthani, which are located in all these 14 planetary systems, and all of them take shelter of river Kaveri during the period of Tula Masa, the 7th solar month of the Vedic solar calendar. So, the exact time of the origin of Kaveri is the Tula Masa Sankramana. Sankramana means the exact beginning. So when the Tula Masa begins, that is known as Tula Sankramana, or also known as the Kaveri Tirthodbhava. When Kaveri became Udbhava, or manifested in this material world and started flowing as a most sacred river. So this Tula Sankramana, the beginning of the Tula Masa, is even today most mystically celebrated as the Kaveri Tirthodbhava, when from the origin of river Kaveri, from the birthplace of Kaveri, which is also known as the Brahma Kunda at Talakaveri, there is the Kaveri Tirthodbhava, when river Kaveri manifests herself from this Brahma Kunda in the form of a holy spring. The water, even today, during that specific time of Kaveri Tirthodbhava at Tula Sankramana, it rises up in the Brahma Kunda, and this is a very, very wonderful spiritual sight to behold. So this year, in year 2020, this most holy time, it has been calculated to be at 9:14 p.m. on October 17, 2020. So this is Kaveri Tirthodbhava, and the wonderful description of the origin of Mother Kaveri as the most sacred river at Talakaveri. Please do like and share this video, and please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please do join us for the next session on Kaveri Vaibhavam, the divine glories of Mother Kaveri. Kaveri Maiya ki Jai, Shri Radha Krishna Bhagavan ki Jai. Hare Krishna.